Okay. All right, let's try this. I hope it works. It's going to be the policy and procedure meeting for the tax year of 2024. Today is January the 3rd of 2025. Uh, the procedures that I'm going to talk about should be in place, barring any changes from corporate. We're going to cover chapter 20 out of the book about due diligence, practice, procedure, all of that. I've been kind of holding it for this day. We're going to talk about some documentations. I'm going to keep it as general as possible because every office is going to have its own little nuances about how they do things. So just bear with me. If you have any other questions, ask your immediate office supervisor or just get in contact with me. I'll answer them as best I can, given the general situation. But otherwise, let's just kind of go at this. This shouldn't take, hopefully, very long. I haven't really planned this out, and I can already think of one thing off the top of my head that I wanted to do that I didn't do in advance. So that's going to add to this just a tad. But besides that, let's just go ahead and do this. First and foremost, I want to talk about chapter 20 out of the book. Practice, procedure, and professional responsibility. We want to talk about taxpayer preparer responsibilities, tax-related identity theft, safeguarding the taxpayer data and taxpayer identification numbers, which we should know by now. That's your social security number, that's your adoption tax identification number, or that's your individual tax identification number. We want to understand our role as a tax professional, learn how to protect taxpayer information and records, understand taxpayer identification numbers. Congratulations, this actually is the final chapter of the book for the Liberty Tax Schools. This last chapter covers some responsibilities and best practices for providing ethical. And I do stress the word ethical. We are an ethical office. If somebody wants us to do something on the bit or shady side, they are out the door. And if you do participate in something on the shady side, you are out the door. All right, so first and foremost, that there's a few things. This is more for our advanced people. If you have foreign addresses, which I do, I have multiple clients that are overseas. I do use the foreign addresses. There's a box in Fusion that you have to tick that says that you need to input a foreign address, and then when you do that, it kind of unlocks a few more fields. Do the best that you can in filling out those fields. Not every field is fillable. Not every country has it broken down as to a province or a state, and then a city, and then a zip code. It gets a little difficult sometimes in figuring that out. Do not abbreviate country name, which is fine. For Fusion, there's a drop-down list. You can find the country that you need. Sometimes taxpayers would want a third-party designee. This kind of is a little bit of permission to the IRS being designated by the taxpayer, saying that the tax preparer can talk to the IRS about a tax return. This is not ironclad. There's more to it than that. You got a lot more rights about representation. If you're an enrolled agent, you can represent anybody. There's a little bit less rights, but still more rights than just an average taxpayer or a tax preparer. I mean, if you participate in the annual filing season program, which is something that I do, I can represent my tax returns that I have done in front of the IRS if I need to. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I've been lucky so far. But some of the people in my office here, Brenda, for instance, she's gone to a few audits, but Brenda is an excellent tax preparer. She's not done anything that's shady or below boards, so her audits have always ended in a positive fashion. But she was able to go because she was a participant in the annual filing season program. This is actually checked, um, and we go with this. The other thing about, yeah, so we go from there. You're also authorizing on this third-party designation to give the IRS information that's missing from the return. Call the IRS for information about the processing of the return. Receive copies or notices of transcript related to your return. And respond to the IRS notice about math errors, offsets, and return preparation. Again, that's kind of a discretionary thing at the IRS level. They're not a big fan of just talking to anybody for good reason. I mean, the reservation that they have is good natured. I have no problem with it. Just keep in mind that the more you participate in training from the IRS's point of view, the more they feel like that you're actually worthy of talking to. And it's not exactly the best turn of phrase, but it's the one I'm going to use. You're not authorizing the designees to receive any refund check, bind you to anything other than including other additional tax liability or otherwise represent you before the IRS. Your authorization will automatically end no later than 1 year. The original due date, not including extensions for filing your tax return. So it doesn't last forever. And like I said, it's not the most powerful thing in the world. No tax preparer or repairer may endorse or otherwise negotiate directly or through an agent a check, including an electronic version of a check for a refund that was issued to the taxpayer that is not the tax preparer for whom he or she prepared the return or claim a refund. Well, yeah, if you prepare your own tax return, you can claim your own refund. That's not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is that you can't be a intermediary. Homeless guy comes in, he has no place to send a refund check, he is not banked, might not qualify for a Deep Blue card because, again, he doesn't have an address, so that doesn't help very much. You can't say, well, hey, just put it in, have the check sent to me. You can't do that. You can't put it in your own bank account. You can't direct deposit it into your own account. That's all against the law. You can end up in a bad way. The penalty is $560 for a tax repairer who endorses or negotiates any check issued to a taxpayer. There is no maximum. It's $560 per occurrence. So just don't do it. Now, yes, I understand that it seems like there might be a little conflict on this when we talk about bank products, but that's not between us and the taxpayer. The bank product is offered by JTH Financial. That is a different party, an independent party. It also goes even farther. Republic Bank of Kentucky for most of us is also involved in that. So a couple levels away from us. That is not a conflict to offer a bank product. It's authorized by the client. They sign for it. The bank takes care of all of it. We're not really involved unless the check prints out here in the store. No, we cannot cash the check. Don't cash the check. Individual income tax returns can be filed using IRS e-file. That's what they want. They recommend it. That's the fastest way of getting anything done. Transmit electronically, and almost every form can now be transmitted, including amendments. 1040Xs can be electronically filed. Have been now for a couple of years. This is limited to tax returns with the prescribed due dates in the current and previous 2 tax years, so I can file not only for a 24, but I can electronically file a 23 and a 22. Individual income tax returns can be e-filed year-round, except for a short cutover period at the end of the calendar year. That's currently in effect. I haven't officially heard a date that e-file will be turned back on. Typically, somewhere around Thanksgiving is when it's turned off. Typically, around the 16th through the 20th of January is when it's turned back on. But I did see one scary day this year. It said the 29th. I don't put a lot of stock in that one. I didn't see any supporting documentation for it. But I'm just putting it out there. It's a possibility. Keep your mind and keep your eyes open. When using IRS e-file preparers and EROs, these are electronic return or originators, must follow these rules. Publication 1345 contains information on requirements for e-file providers. It is important to be aware and complying with these e-file rules, liberties, and our office's procedures cover this. I'm not suggesting that you don't read it. Go ahead and read it. Knowledge never hurt anybody. Okay, well, that's a sweeping statement. I mean, I'm sure there's opportunities where people did get hurt by knowledge, but in this case, this knowledge won't hurt you. But again, like I said, we have procedures in place that basically cover this. The ERO in this case is Brett, or Z. He's the ERO. He's already taking care of his business as part of this. We're ready to go. Some individual tax returns cannot be e-filed, although e-filing should be made available soon. These are tax returns with fiscal year tax periods, which hardly anybody does, so I'm not worried about that. Returns containing forms or schedules that cannot be processed by the IRS e-file. Even at that, the IRS sometimes allows electronic filing and then allows you to mail the form that can't be transmitted electronically. So you can e-file a form, the IRS has it, they kind of sit on it until a paper form that was necessary shows up. There's actually a document that prints out with that links up this form with that tax return. Those are kind of a priority thing to the IRS, again, as opposed to just emailing or postal mailing the entire return. If you send and post the form that's just the one form and linking it with electronic return form, those get higher priority. The IRS cannot electronic process returns with rare or unusual processing conditions. These conditions change from year to year. The software will tell you what the problem is. If it's transmitted, which Fusion won't let you do, but if it does, it'll reject. And then you'll have a code. There is a way to look in Fusion to find out why it was rejected. There's a place where you can look for codes, and then you can go from there. All prescribed due dates for filing returns apply to electronically filed returns. The provider that receives the return, the electronically filing on or before the due date of the return must ensure that it transmits the electronic portion of the return before the due date, including extensions. If the return is electronically filed after the due date and an extension has not been accepted by the IRS for the return is not timely filed and may still be subject to IRS filing penalties. Yeah, that's really not too much of a problem during the season. It gets a little dicey at the end of the season because, yes, we still want to double check all returns. We're not gonna relax on the fact that all returns need to be looked at by somebody else that's not the preparer, when at all possible. Really no exception to that during the tax year. We have enough staff. We can get it done. But I don't want returns sitting around for days waiting for a double check. It should be done the same day. Returns done, goes for double check, transmitted. It shouldn't take that long. Returns that are requesting in advance are higher priority than ones that aren't. I hate to say it, but that's the way it should go because these people, they want their loans. I understand that. There's no reason why they applied for a loan. They need their money. They need it quickly. So those returns that have advanced products on them, we give them a little bit higher priority. We double check them first. We get them out of here first. Then we go back to the ones that aren't having a loan attached to them. And we get those out of here. But in a perfect world, and 99% of the time we're able to do this, a return that is finished on the one day is transmitted that same day. There are very few exceptions to that, and we can pull this off. An e-filed return is not considered filed until the IRS acknowledges acceptance of the electronic portion of the tax return. The IRS accepts individual tax returns electronically only if the taxpayer signs the return using a personal identification number. It's generated by the program, or they can enter their own. It's up to them. That's not a problem. But we don't have to worry about this per se. Again, the program, Fusion, takes care of this aspect of it. There's nothing special we have to do. Signing electronic returns, part of your individual training, your one-on-one training is going to be talking about the signature pads, how to do that. It's pretty simple. It's signed right there it shows up there right on the screen. It gets pasted right onto the copy of the PDF. We have this. It's available for us to look at. Taxpayers must sign individual tax returns electronically, or if they're mailing it, they must sign it with ink. Don't mail something off that hasn't been signed. Form for that is 8879. You'll see that a lot. Declaration includes the taxpayer's declaration or penalties of perjury that the return is correct and complete and true, as well as the taxpayer's consent to disclose. The consent to disclose allows the IRS to disclose information to the taxpayer's return providers. This allows the provider to receive an acknowledgement of the receipt or reason of rejection for e-filed return. Yeah, we can find that out. It doesn't take very long usually. Sometimes it's as rapid as 10 minutes. We can find out whether it's been accepted or rejected. And if it's been rejected, find out why. Taxpayers must sign the new electronic return data on the income tax if the income tax return is changed and the amounts differ by more than $50 to total income, adjusted gross income, or $14 for total tax, federal income tax withheld refund, or amounts you owe. Also, if you accidentally transpose Social Security numbers, you'll need a new signature. Again, they can come back to the office, you can sign. Those people will get a higher priority. Those won't take very long. Or you can send it off, request for remote signatures. You do an email or text, again, something that will be covered more in depth in your training. Once signed, we must transmit the electronic return as soon as possible. Again, we're not going to cut any corners. We're going to have it double checked. Must not electronically file individual tax returns before receiving W-2, W-2G, or 1099-R. Yes. Don't transmit a return that you don't have all the information for. If the taxpayer says, "Hey, I'm missing a W-2," go as far as you can today, but you're not transmitting it today. Not until they get that W-2, and it might piss them off. I'm sorry about that. But part of our responsibility is to file a complete and correct return. And if we know that there's a form missing, we can't transmit it. Yes, I know that we can go back later and file a 1040X, but that is not the way that we want to do it. It might end badly for your taxpayer. So don't do that. Wait until you have all the information. Listen to your clients. Not all the time are they going to be willingly volunteering that information. They might say it in passing. Look at your forms. If they're a return client, there's already a list of W-2s that might be expected. I'm not saying they are. They might not have worked there that last year. But you have to ask, did you work at so-and-so place? Because it's being listed as a place that was on your tax return for last year. And hopefully they'll say, no, man, I didn't work for them for a couple years now. If we can't get a form, these forms, can't file this return until the middle of February anyway. We've already talked about that back in chapter 3, I believe. Might have been 4, but I think it's 3. About what to do. Substitutes. Substitute W-2, substitute 1099-R, substitute W-2G. Must ensure that the stockpiler returns does not occur at their office, collecting returns from taxpayers or another authorized e-file provider before acceptance. After official acceptance to participate in e-file or in IRS e-file, stockpiling refers to waiting more than 3 calendar days to submit the return to the IRS once the IRS has all the information necessary for e-filing. Again, that's not a problem for us. We do same-day service. Nobody goes home until everything that was possible to transmit has been transmitted. Last shift, sorry guys, but you're the ones that are responsible for the double check. Usually it's not much of a problem. IRS does not consider current filing year returns held before the due date, accepts the transmission of electronic returns stockpile. Doesn't matter when it was signed, it matters when the IRS got it. That's their date. If we can't do it until the IRS date, or until the IRS accepts the transmission return, so right now, yeah, I can do a tax return right now. A guy with the W-2 might get it on his last paycheck of the year, or his first paycheck of the year. Yeah, they'll throw in the W-2, or a self-employed person, they can come in here and file a tax return. I can get one done. That's not a problem. Can't transmit it. I have to tell the client that. Well, hey, the IRS isn't accepting tax returns currently, but we can do this. I can have it ready to go, so when the IRS starts doing acceptance, then it will be picked up. But you have to tell them it's not going to be accepted in the near future. I don't know exactly when at this point, but and it might get picked up before that. The IRS does something called hub testing, where they grab 10,000 returns from the different tax preparation companies and runs it through their system to see if there's any bugs. That's what they call hub testing. You might be lucky enough that instead of waiting to the IRS filing date where they turn it on, you might get picked up on one of these hub tests. It gets accepted a little bit faster. Like we talked about, we can e-file a minimum of 3 years from the due date of the return, or the due date which was filed, whichever is later. Although most tax professionals recommend retaining tax records for 7. ERO is required to maintain the material and documents listed below. These materials documents are required to be retained until the end of the calendar year at the business address from which the return originated, or at the location that allows the ERO to readily access the material, as it must be available at the time of IRS request. ERO may retain the required records at the business address of the responsible official, or at the location that allows the responsible official to readily access the material during any period that the time the office is closed, as it must be available at the time of the IRS request through the end of the calendar year, processing year, not tax year. Not a problem. That's what the file cabinets back there are for. And our file cabinets are going back to cover all this period. Not only the current year, but we go back a couple of years in our file cabinets here at the office. These materials that they're talking about in 8453, which is the individual income tax transmittal for an IRS e-file return, and supporting documents that are not included in the electronic records submitted to the IRS, copies of W-2, W-2G, and 1099-R, copies of the IRS e-file and consent, complete copy of the electronic portion of the return that can be readily and accurately converted into an electronic transmission the IRS can process, and the acknowledgement for IRS accepted returns. Yes, we have paper copies of those. We're trying to get away from it as best we can, but especially this particular office, we've got a lot of people that are old school. They don't trust electronics. They don't trust the government. They barely trust us, just because they don't trust anybody. They're not too happy about electronic stuff. They like paper. They like something they can hold. I understand that. We have those copies. We give them back as much as possible, but we still always have a little something. As far as a lot of these concerns, yes, we scan all the W-2s and the 1099s and the W-2Gs. We have electronic copies of these that we can get to, and they go back as long as, 2020? So we could go back even farther and still have access to this information. 8879 and 8878 must be available to the IRS in the same manner as described for the above 3 years from the due date which the IRS received the return. Again, not a problem. We have that electronically saved to the cloud. We can get it whenever we need. That meets the requirements. If the acknowledgement is used to identify the submission ID, the acknowledgement must be kept following these requirements. Again, that's automatically saved to the cloud. That's really not much of a problem for us. They say that we can electronically image store all paper records that are required to the IRS. That's what we're doing. We're trying to get away from paper as much as possible. You know, I would like that. I'd love to have the fact that one tax year, on an average tax year for us, can be held in 1 or 2 file cabinet drawers instead of an entire file cabinet. I welcome that day. But we have this. We scan all documents. We upload them to the client portal. IRS electronically acknowledges the receipt of all transmissions. Returns in each transmission are either accepted or rejected for specific reasons. Accepted return meets the processing criteria. The IRS considers it to be filed as soon as the return is signed electronically or when the IRS receives a paper signature. Rejected returns fail to meet the processing criteria or are not considered to be filed by the IRS. That's correct. One of the reasons why I hate it when people wait till the last minute. If it gets rejected, it does cause a bit of a problem. Now the IRS would acknowledge the fact that an attempt was made. When it comes to that, I'm probably previewing a little bit, but I'll just go ahead and talk it now. If you file on the last day of the tax return, you find out tomorrow morning, the 16th of April, that a return was rejected, it's not necessarily late. The IRS does recognize an attempt was made and it was rejected. You got 3 days grace to fix it before they will consider it late. Which is exactly what this is talking about. Like I said, you got 3 days. If the IRS rejects the electronic portion of an individual income tax return for processing, the ERO cannot rectify the reason for the rejection. The ERO must take reasonable steps to inform the taxpayer of the rejection within 24 hours. We do that. That's one of the first things I do in the morning is I take a look and see if there are any rejects. And then why? Why was it rejected? Most of the time it's going to be about a Social Security number or child that's already been claimed, which again is a Social Security number. To file a timely return, the taxpayer must file the paper return by the later of the due date of the return or 10 calendar days after the IRS gives notification that it has rejected an electronic return. Sometimes that's the problem. Somebody else claimed the kid. There's no way you're going to get that return to file electronically without taking the kid off. You don't want to do that. Well, you can, and then start going through the process. But you're going to end up mailing a bunch of stuff to the IRS anyway, so you might as well just go ahead and bite the bullet now. You have 10 days. Send as much documentation as possible to support your position that the reason why it was rejected is because somebody that claimed it depended on their tax return and shouldn't have. And here's my proof why this dependent should be listed on my tax return. And of course, you have 10 days to get to the IRS. The IRS will take some time to figure out whether or not your claim is valid or not. My worst case scenario was 7 years. Identity theft, that happens. A lot of times we'll get a rejection because an IP pin was missing. Identity protection pin that's issued by the IRS. They send out those letters in January. They must be put on the tax return. If they're not on the tax return, they will be rejected by the IRS. Identity theft is a serious crime, also known as identity fraud, which occurs when somebody uses a taxpayer's personal identification number or other information like name or other identifying information without permission to commit fraud. Identity thief may use a Social Security number to do a job, may file a tax return using the Social Security number to receive a refund. This happens. Generally, a thief will also use the Social Security number to file a false return early in the tax season. Yeah, they're going to be there right away. Because the Social Security number is no good if the actual person files a tax return. Taxpayers may be unaware that they are victims until they try to file their own tax return and then it gets rejected. And the reason comes back is Social Security number appeared on a previously filed tax return. Uh-oh. That's a problem. They also may receive a letter from the IRS to alert them that they're identified as a suspicious return filed with the taxpayer's identification numbers. Tax preparers play a critical role in assisting clients, both individuals and businesses, who are victims of this identity theft. To reduce taxpayer risk, tax preparers should maintain the confidentiality of all Social Security numbers and follow IRS security guidelines, which we have put in place. These IRS security guidelines are in place in our office procedures. We don't leave packets laying around. We don't leave W-2s, 1099s, just laying around out at the front desk. You're not working on that return, it's not at your desk. It's in the file cabinet, in the back room, where nobody else goes except us. For tax preparers, warning signs that the individual's client's Social Security number has been compromised, putting them at risk, include a return being rejected, and the reject code saying it was already filed. Taxpayer notices activity or receives IRS notices regarding their tax return after all tax issues have been resolved, refund paid, or account balances have been paid. I've seen these letters a couple of times. It's kind of scary. You know what's happened right now. The IRS kind of knows what's happened. They've got an idea. That's why they sent the letter. So now it's up to our client to kind of basically prove, no, that's not me, this is me. Not the worst problem in the world to have. IRS notice indicates that the client received wages from an employer unknown to them. Well, yeah, when you're doing fraud stuff, sometimes they use an employer identification number that's also fraudulent. That might be an actual one somewhere, but if it's in California and you're in Delaware, yeah, the IRS is going to take notice of that. Taxpayers who owes additional tax, refund offset, or has collection actions taken against him or her for a tax year a return was not filed. Well, we already covered that in one chapter. Not everybody needs to file every year. If your income is below the filing threshold, and you have no real good reason to file a tax return, you don't need to. But maybe somebody did. Seen that letter too. Oh, I didn't file a tax return for that year. What is this about? Well, I hate to tell you. Remember that a tax preparer must have the power of attorney on file and authenticate his or her identity before the IRS customer service representative can provide any taxpayer information. For business taxpayers, the warning signs can be a return is accepted as an amended return, but the taxpayer has not filed the return, so a 1040X has showed up, but the IRS doesn't actually have a 1042X with. Taxpayer receives an IRS notice about fictitious employees. Well, that's on the business side. That's not really something that we have a lot of problem with. Taxpayer notices activity related to or receives IRS notices regarding a defunct, closed, or dormant business after all account balances have been paid. Again, this is from the business side. This is a little bit less of a problem for us particularly. I mean, we do a few business type returns, but small potatoes. If the records are affected by identity theft and the notice received from the IRS, the taxpayer should respond right away to the name and phone number printed on the IRS letter. Tell your client, hey, call them right now. Get a hold of them. Tell them that it's fraudulent, or tell them that it's real. It's possible. It got flagged. It might be, the IRS is just concerned. Outrageous things do happen. It could be true. Thieves may also use stolen employer identification numbers to create false W-2s to support fraudulent refund schemes. I believe it was last year. It might have been the year before. You know how it is. Years run together. We did go through a series of that. Had a bunch of people coming down that were filing a tax return with us with W-2s from a company up in Salina. And they were fraudulent. They were trying to rip it off. And pay attention, W-2s, you get an idea of what they look like. And if you've already done a W-2 from one company and another W-2 shows up that doesn't look the same, even though it's from the same company, hey, that's an alarm right there. Hey, something's wrong. Pay attention to the font. You get used to what size of font, what it should look like on any W-2. No fancy fonts. It should be just a regular one. It should be of a size that is consistent all the way throughout the return. All the way through the form. If there's any variance to that, that's an alarm. That's a flag. Phishing is the creation and use of email websites to mimic legitimate business emails and websites. Watch those things. There's some scary stuff out there, and especially, you might see something, and it's hard to catch because these guys are smart. If they put their talents to use in a legitimate business, they'd be millionaires, but they don't want to deal with that. They'd rather just rip you off. Most common form is the act of sending email to user falsely claiming to be an establishment, a legitimate enterprise to scam the user into surrendering private information that will be used for identity theft. We've all seen those emails. We just need to keep in mind on that. If it seems fishy, then it probably is. IRS does not initiate contacts with taxpayers via emails. They never have. They send actual physical mail through the United States Postal Service. Client calls up and says, I got an email from the IRS. You already know that that's false. IRS does not request detailed personal information through email or ask taxpayers for personal identification numbers, passwords, or similar secret access information for their credit card, bank, or other financial accounts. They also don't take gift cards as payment. I can't believe the amount of people that still think up there, oh yeah, you can pay with your iTunes card. No, you can't. If an unsolicited email is received that claims to be from the IRS actually has an email website. They want to track that down. They have their specialists to see if they can find the guilty party. To assist the victims of identity theft, the Federal Trade Commission also has an agency for identity theft, recommends these steps. File a report with the local police. Yes, do that. Report identity theft at the FTC website. Talk to your major credit bureaus. Talk to your credit card maybe. Make sure that nothing was opened in your name. Look at your credit report every once in a while. I do pay up a little bit at my Discover card for identity theft protection. They look once a month to see if something's fishy. And they alert me if something's changed. A reoccurring bill has gone up or has gone down. A line of credit has been opened in your name. Sometimes it's legit. Sometimes it's not. But at least I have an indication that something bad has happened. Of course, I hope nothing bad happens, because by the time that gets to me, it's already too late, but, that's a different issue. Tax preparers should take these steps if the taxpayer's Social Security number are compromised or they suspect that or know that they're victims of tax-related identity theft. Immediately contact the number if the IRS receives a notice. Complete Form 14039, Identity Theft Affidavit. If the taxpayer's Social Security number has been compromised, this form allows the IRS to put an indicator on the tax records for questionable activity. The taxpayer should continue to file returns, pay taxes, even if it must be done by paper. while cases are being researched. If the IRS has previously contacted, did not have a resolution, call. There's a specialized unit for that. Be aware that the nature of these cases is complex. Yeah? They're more likely to believe the people that went to an actual tax company, whether it be Liberty or one of the other less competent companies that are out there. Let's just put it like this to be somewhat nice. As opposed to somebody just working by themselves. Because coming into an actual tax company, an actual tax preparation company, we've seen the person, we've seen an ID. It's a little bit more believable to the IRS that this is the actual person. IP PIN is given to taxpayers who have been confirmed identity theft victims and certain taxpayers who opt into the program. You can send a letter off to the IRS. I believe there's a form on the IRS website they can fill out on the website and send it to them, requesting that, hey, don't accept a tax return for me unless it has an IP PIN on it. You can do it as a preventative. We've started actually recommending this for dependents. Some dependents that keep on getting claimed by somebody else. Well, okay, how do you head that off? IP PIN, the IRS is going to send it to the custodial parent. Or at least that's a good indication that's the custodial parent. When the taxpayer has an IP PIN, it prevents someone else from filing a tax return with that Social Security number. It's going to reject until you get that PIN on there. And a lot of the times, these people forget. They forget they have one. Not only did they get the letter, but they threw it away. Oh yeah, I remember that. What did I do with it? They're going to go home. They're going to spend the next 2 hours looking for it and then conclude that they threw it out. Well, fortunately, you can go to the IRS website, fill out a form, and get another one sent to them. It's going to take a couple of days, but one will be mailed. Meanwhile, you're going to sit on that return until you have that. Don't bother trying to send it again. It's just going to reject. Until you get that PIN, it's going nowhere. Taxpayer is eligible for an IP PIN if, as a confirmed victim of tax-related or identity theft, the IRS sends a CP01A notice containing an IP PIN. Like I said, it's mailed out about now or within the next couple of weeks. Any taxpayer wants an IP PIN, even though they are not victims of identity theft, may obtain one. Go to the irs.gov/IP PIN, select Get an IP PIN tool, verify their identity, create an account, which sometimes is like pulling teeth. That ID Me tool that they have sucks. It wants to take a picture, a digital picture, so make sure that whatever you're doing has a web camera on it. It makes it easier. It's one of the rare cases where I suggest maybe you do it on your phone. IP PIN is valid for a calendar year, so a new IP PIN must be obtained for each filing season. Can't use last year's IP PIN to file this year's tax return. Won't work. IP PIN must be used on all federal income tax returns. Any delinquent returns filed during the current calendar year. IP PIN cannot be used on a state income tax return. If the state also issues an IP PIN, it is only used for the state income tax return. Haven't seen that one yet, but Kansas does operate in when the IRS accepts it, they accept it. If the IRS rejects it, they reject it. So that may be one of the reasons why we here don't see it very often, because it is a rider on a federal tax return. Tax preparers can also become targets of criminals. Yes, and we have lots of information. Remember to follow the security guidelines obtained in publication 1345. Online providers who experience a data breach must contact the IRS with one business day. We have procedures set into place. There actually is a book in the back room about what we're going to do if we find out that we've been compromised. But the best way of not being compromised is not to put yourself in trouble. That's why we don't leave things out on the desk. That's why everything is locked up in a file cabinet or put in the back room when it's not in use. Publication 4557 deals with that. They want to have a security data plan, and we have one. Examples of security controls: locking doors to restrict access to paper, electronic files, requiring passwords to restrict access to computer files, encrypting electronically stored taxpayer data, keeping a backup of electronic data for recovery purposes, shredding paper containing taxpayer information before throwing it in the trash. Do not email unencrypted sensitive personal information. Outlook's really good at identifying a email that might have personal data on it and asking you if you want to encrypt it. Go ahead and say yeah. Authorized IRS e-file providers that participate in online providers must follow the IRS's 6 privacy and business standards to better serve taxpayers and protect their individual income tax information that's collected, processed, and stored. They have a checklist for you. We have a written security plan. We have procedures in place to prevent that happening. Define safeguards and require a responsible person to review and approve the security plan. It's already been done. Evaluate, test the plan, safeguards, and document deficiencies. Exclude and execute a plan to address them. That's been put in place. Protect from unauthorized access and potential danger in all places where taxpayer information is located. That's the back room. Nobody goes back there that doesn't work here. And even the waivers, technically they work here. They don't go back there. Right procedures that prevent unauthorized access and authorized processes. Ensure that taxpayer information, including data on hardware and media, is not left unsecured on desks, photocopiers, or mailboxes, vehicles, trash cans, or in rooms in the office or at home where unauthorized access can occur. Not a problem. Tax returns don't leave the office without my knowledge or Shannon's knowledge. And they should never actually leave the office. There's no reason for a tax return to be taken home, ever. Lock doors to file rooms and or computer rooms. They are locked. Provide secure disposal of taxpayer information. Well, we're boxing up a tax year right now that's going to be getting ready to go for shredding. And we found out that we're actually holding on to a couple more years that we don't need to. And we got a lot of shredding coming up. Ollie North would be proud. Create rules that describe responsibilities and expected behavior regarding computer information systems as paper records, usage of taxpayer data, and have all information system users complete and sign and submit an acknowledgement they have read, understood, and agreed and complied to the rules of behavior. Make sure third-party providers providing information technology services meet the requirements. Not really a problem that you have to worry about. That's a Brett problem. Explain rules when interviewing prospective personnel. Well, already talked about that. Perform a background or reference check on new employees. Have personnel who have access to taxpayer information sign non-disclosure agreements on the use of information and access to taxpayer information for people that don't work here anymore. To help ensure the accuracy, validity, and consistency and reliability of taxpayer data, manage taxpayer data information systems based on these guidelines. Access to information systems should only be on a valid need-to-know basis. Have a written contingency plan to perform critical processing if the business is disrupted. Should include a plan to protect both electronic and paper information systems and identify individuals who will recover and restore the information after disruption or failure. Yeah, my biggest fear is actually a tornado. I have less fear about a fire. I'd actually welcome a fire if that was the disaster. At least then I know that the records are destroyed. It's the tornado that scares me. I can't test that contingency plan periodically. I can't find a big enough wind machine. Backup taxpayer data files regular. Well, that's not really a problem. Everything's saved automatically to the cloud, so it's less of an issue. I, on the business side, have a small set of business clients that I have to use Drake. And up until now, Drake was not available in the cloud, so everything that I've done has been saved to a local drive that I have to back up periodically to make sure that if it crashes, I still have it. Actually, come to think about it, I got to back that up. Okay. Identify authorized users of electronic taxpayer information systems, grant specific assets, rights, and privileges. Based on how long you've been here, changes about how much access that you have. Not everybody can transmit a tax return. For instance, assign each user a unique identifier and verify the identity of each user. We've already done that. Implement password management procedures. Already done. Use strong passwords with a mix of letters, numbers. Again, that's already been achieved by Liberty. Have barriers like firewall, routers, gateways. That's in place. Use best practices to store on separate secure computers or media that are not connected to a network that are password protected and encrypted. Try to refrain as much as possible about doing personal business on company products. I understand that sometimes you just have to. There's not a way around it. I get that. I'm not a big stickler about you must. But there is a point. Don't do stupid things. I don't mind if you check your email. I do mind if you're playing Candy Crush. I do kind of mind if you're shopping. Especially if you're at Temu or some of those other somewhat disreputable, somewhat reputable companies. Not a big fan of Wayfair either. Encrypt taxpayer information. Well, that's basically done. Like I said, when you have the option on emails, make sure that you do encrypt it. It's good practice even in your personal life. Firewall is updated. Remove all taxpayer information once the retention period expires by using software designed to securely remove data from computers and media before disposing of it. Yeah, magnets are great tools for that. Run one over a hard drive, see what happens. Store computer disk, removable media tape. Well, that's kind of old school nowadays. Flash drives, though, in a secure location. Yeah, we've got a couple of flash drives, and when not in use, they are in the back room. Don't leave them at the desks. There's really no reason once the season starts, very rare reason to actually bring out a flash drive from the back room. Restrict authorized access to media storage. Limit removal of taxpayer information to authorized persons and perform information access audits regularly. Right now, the only people that are authorized, as far as I'm concerned, to take information about tax returns out of the office are myself and Shannon. Nobody else. Without prior knowledge. Securely remove all taxpayer information from disposing of computers, diskettes, magnetic tape, hard drives. Yeah, well, Shred or burn paper documents. Again, just if it's got a social security number on it, don't throw it in the trash. It needs to be shredded. Determine if risks are acceptable. Do I really want to click that link? Chances are the answer is probably no. Each person listed on a U.S. federal income tax return must have a valid taxpayer identification number, a social security number, individual tax identification number, adoption taxpayer identification number. If you don't have this, the IRS is not going to be too keen on accepting your return. You must list the social security number of any person claimed as a dependent. If you do not list the dependent social security number required, or you list an incorrect social security number, the dependent may be disallowed. We already talked about this. There is a couple of exceptions to that rule, as if you have a dependent that's in Canada or Mexico. There actually is a little checkbox that will help you kind of work your way around it, but it's still going to take some time. If a person you expect to claim as a dependent does not have a Social Security number, either that person must apply for one by filing an SS5 with the Social Security Administration. Says it takes about 2 weeks. That's the government. If you're a dependent and do not have a required Social Security number by the filing date, you can file an extension. Which, as the taxpayer, that would be kind of difficult because the extension requires a Social Security number. That would be interesting. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Let's see here. With the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the IRS cannot issue an I-10 or renew an I-10 unless there is an allowable tax benefit to the taxpayer or the applicant unless they qualify for an exemption, which is quite rare, it says. See page 11 of W-7. An allowable tax benefit allows the spouse filing a joint return, head of household, American Opportunity, premium tax credit, child and dependent care credit, or credit for other dependents. I-10s does not have a requirement to file a return or desire to file a tax return. The W-7 application will be rejected by the IRS. We don't do W-7s. Let's just put it like this. There's a lot of hoops to jump through on that one, and corporate doesn't actually support it at this point. They might go back to it at a future date, but currently, we don't do W-7s. Even if we did, it can't be just done by just anybody. You have to pass a background check. You have to get fingerprinted. It is kind of an annoying process. File a U.S. tax return or listed on a U.S. tax return as a spouse or dependent. You must have a taxpayer identification number. There is issues I-10s to non-residents and others living in the U.S. who are required to have a U.S. 10, but are not eligible to claim a Social Security number. You're eligible for a Social Security number if you're a citizen or have been admitted by the U.S. for a permanent residence or U.S. employment. Examples of individuals who need an I-10, non-resident aliens filing a U.S. tax return but not eligible for a Social Security number. U.S. resident aliens file a U.S. tax return. Non-resident aliens waiting to claim a tax treaty benefit. Dependents or spouses of a U.S. citizen or resident alien not eligible for a Social Security number. Dependents or spouses of a non-resident alien holding a U.S. visa. I have a client right now that falls under that category. And actually it gets even more complicated because he lives in the United Arab Emirates. So, yeah, that was an adventure to try and get that set up and involve the United States Embassy. Have fun. I-10s look like a Social Security number, but they start with 9. Has a specified range of numbers in the 4th and 5th digits. The 4th and 5th digits kind of tell the IRS when it expires. They look at those 2 middle digits. Certain numbers expire in certain years. Once you get an I-10, it's not forever. They do expire. Especially if you don't use them. Issuance of an I-10 does not entitle the recipient to Social Security benefits. Give the individual the right to work. Any individual with an I-10 who becomes eligible to work in the U.S. must apply for a Social Security card. I-10 cannot be used to prove work or authorization on an I-9. Provide legal immigration status. If you or your spouse or dependents are not eligible for Social Security numbers, you should apply for an I-10 by filling out a W-7. W-7 should not be completed by you or your spouse or dependent are eligible to obtain a Social Security number. Well, yeah, apply for that. It's better. Required to submit original documents verifying foreign status. That's exactly right. They're requesting that you send the actual passport, not a copy of it. to the IRS processing center. I believe for us, we'd have to send it, it was to a place in Austin. You have to mail it to Austin. They'll mail it back once they're done with it. Meanwhile, they don't have their passport. In-person applications may be submitted to an employee of the IRS, authorized review and acceptance agents. Yeah, there are 2 levels of acceptance agents. They do have one that they consider. Screen time out here. Hope that the movie's still going. That's kind of scary. Doing this in the new style, I'm going to be pissed off if I get done and nothing's there. I-10 may expire if you don't use it. Already talked about that. So all I-10s not used on a federal income tax return at least once for the tax years 19, 20, 21 expire on December of 22. Like I said, they look at those middle digits to figure out when they actually expire. Expiring I-10 numbers and who expect to file a return must submit a renewal application. IRS sends out a letter saying, hey, yeah, by the way, you're about to expire. 70 through 88 are expired currently. Like we said, how to renew it? You need a W-7. Once renewed, an I-10 will remain in effect until it's not used on a tax return at least once in 3 tax years, or a number is added to schedule to expire. So even if you keep filing, there's a point where it does expire. And if you don't file for a couple years in a row, it will be expired, whether or not the date has arrived. Boy, there's bad talking about a lot of this, and it should have been in an earlier chapter as far as I'm concerned, but there you go. Circular 230 provides information for a tax preparer about due diligence in preparing, assisting, and approving and filing tax return documents, affidavits, and other papers regarding to IRS matters, determining correctness of oral written representations made by the petitioner, and determining the correctness of oral written representations made by the petitioner to clients regarding any matter. May not charge an unconscionable fee in connection with any matter before the IRS. Yeah, I can't charge you $10,000 to file a tax return. Unless I have a really good reason, and it better be a very complicated tax return. Yeah. May not charge a contingent fee. I can't charge you a return based on your refund. I can't say that, oh, okay, the fee is going to be 20% of your refund. Nope, can't do that. May not represent the clients with conflicting interests. Technically, without permission, I cannot do both returns for divorced clients. If they know about it and say it's okay, yeah, I can do that, but really hand one off to the other client. There's one year they came to me at the same time. They made a dual appointment. They really wanted me to do it, and I was a little apprehensive about it. It was the first time I actually came up against that one, so I did pass off the other client to Brenda. Citing Circular 230. It's a conflict of interest. I really can't do it. May not cash checks issued by the U.S. Treasury. Yeah, go to the bank. Go to the check casher. We're not that. Don't cash them. May not willfully requisite or through gross incompetence advise the clients to take a petition or sign a tax return for a claim or refund that the petitioner knows to reason or reasonably should know contains a position that lacks a reasonable basis, is an unreasonable position, is a willful attempt by the tax preparer to understate the liability for tax recklessness or intentional disregard of the regulations. This one right here is the one that you can really say, well, hey, you told me that you had a W-2 that you don't have yet. We need to wait for it. And this is the reason why. Now, that's being really strict on that rule, but that's your defense. It's a Circular 230 violation. I know that there's a missing W-2. I can't file without it. All right, so that's the end of what we're talking about here as far as chapter 20 of the book. Should be wrapping up here shortly. I've just got a couple of minor things that I want to talk about here. This will take a little bit of time still. Pause that thought for just a second, because like I said, when I started this, I forgot to put one thing in place that I really wanted to do for us. Come on, slow computer. All right, a few things I want to talk about as far as the computer is concerned, about some of the websites and such. This one right here, I know some people there's a love-hate relationship with Facebook, but at the end of the day, it's still one of the better tools that most people are at least familiar with. We have a group Facebook page. This is an exclusive. Not anybody can just join. You have to be approved to join this group. But I do recommend it, because here is the place that we will put information, the latest updates from the IRS, information about webinars that you might be interested in, and I do post them all year long. I post information about webinars that I think that are particularly useful. I just don't post everything. I take a lot of webinars that I don't think that are valid of time, but I will appoint of just about any IRS webinar I can find, because if the IRS deemed it was important enough as a webinar, you should probably watch it. Again, knowledge is power in this business. And the more knowledgeable you have, the better off you are. You can't have enough of it. You will never have all of it. It's impossible. But I recommend that you join our Facebook group as soon as possible, Liberty ANTV 8948. Apply for it. We'll accept you, and then you'll be able to get updates as far as information. Let's see here. Again, as a general rule, I have some tabs open up here that are just for the office. Different offices have different procedures. I'm not going to go over those. But I do want to talk about the Liberty Resource Center. That's at libertytax.net. It's useful, like you can see right now. There is information up here. This changes. This is stuff that corporate has decided that's important for you to notice right off. I want you guys to look at it. Feel free to look at it. Feel free to go anywhere on this website that you can possibly go. Learn everything that you can. And like I said, up here, these things right here are important things. And they do color coordinate them. If there was something orange or something red up there, big problem. Pay attention to that one. It might say, hey, fusion's down. We're trying to work on it. That happens. But at least now when you saw it here and you can't get into fusion, you know why. I'm going to scroll down here just a little bit more. 2-minute drill. This comes out frequently. Usually it's the CEO. That's not the COO. That's the COO. And a 2-minute drill is kind of a lie. They want to try and keep it to 2 minutes. But usually, well, the CEO started calling it the 2-minute-ish drill, but I've seen it up there over 4 minutes. This is just information again. Watch it. Don't watch it. I mean, it's not hugely important, but it's got information in it. It might be helpful. I don't care if you watch it. Go right ahead. Over here, Liberty Express calls. These happen on a weekly basis during off-season. During on-season, they happen a little bit more often, a couple of times a week. You don't have to watch the whole thing because a lot of times they start off with some information that's useful, and then they'll talk about some franchisee and how they're doing things. Hey, you might want to watch it. It might give you some ideas. And sometimes you just, hey, you know, I got things. So I got the information I needed. Go on with your day. Scroll down a little bit more. Again, some upcoming events. You know, this may or may not be useful. Like, for instance, February 28th, the Easy Advance ends. We already know that. January 18th, the Holiday Advance ends. So that's information that's useful. Again, here's some more news and announcements. These are basically things that might have been at the top of the screen, but have been bumped down, but that's not always the case. Some things that just weren't hugely important, but they wanted to get it out there. Again, feel free to click on any of these links that you need. Liberty Tax Tools. This is one way to get into Fusion real quick. And this is another place to go to the hub. At the hub, you can go into e-learning, for instance. This is another way to get there. On e-learning, this is another way to get into Fusion. And then we have this customer management console up here. Something that Liberty's trying to sunset, but it's going to take a while. This is more of their old way of doing things. But if you need some client information, and find out if they even filed a tax return back here in 2016, hey, this is where you can go. You can find out whether they filed a tax return at your office or in your entity, all the way back to, well, for us, it goes back to 2010 at this particular office. We can find records for that. Hey, did I file a tax return with you guys in 2010? Yeah, sure. Let's see here. Another thing I wanted to point out about here, I'm going to go back to the top. Under this tab, Training, just hover over it, and then it'll open up this sub-menu, and then go down to Tax Pros. It'll open up that sub-menu, go over to Tax School. And you'll come up with this screen, and I apologize for the computer being slow. I should have rebooted. But here is all the chapters that were covered in Tax School, and I'm pointing this out for an important idea. So say, for instance, I'm going to click this tab. It's going to open the Chapter 6. Keep this in mind, because look right here is something called homework. Those are the answers to the questions in the book, in the chapter. I recommend using the questions in the chapter to do practice returns in Fusion. And these are the answers to figure out if you did it right. If your number's off, then you go through the documents and find out why. Where did you go wrong? I'll come back to this idea in a minute because I will show you up here on this tab. This is Fusion, how to get to a practice return. Practice returns, if you want to go to one, there's these ribbons over here on the right side of the screen. You click that, it brings you this drop-down box. In this drop-down box, we have this one right here. It's practice. If you click that, it takes you to a version of Fusion where you can create returns for practice purposes. They're not real returns. They don't count to our total starts for the day. That's the idea. Make sure that when you do a tax return, that if you're doing the one out of the book, you choose to do it for the 2023 year. That way, when you look at the homework answers, you'll actually get the right one. If you choose 2024 and you look at the homework answers, you'll get the wrong answer. It might be the right answer for that particular year, but it's going to be the wrong answer compared to what's in the homework. So do make sure that you choose the proper year for that. This is another place where the tax return practice might come in handy. You got a client that, well, should we file jointly or should we file separately? Well, here's a place you can run it out. Do a couple of practice returns. See what happens. Should Joe claim Robert this year or should Linda claim Robert this year? Practice return. Find out what's the best result. And then you go back to the real return and do it. Let's see, is there anything else that I wanted to cover out of Fusion? I think I've covered everything that I particularly wanted. Don't get so hung up on my screen that you see here. My screen's got a lot more information on it than most people's screens. I will point out this tab right here. This is going to become important as we go on. Appointments. Somebody calls up. They want to make an appointment. Well, first and foremost, make sure you're at the right office. And then go to the date and see if there's a time available. We actually have an appointment on the book for today. This is a good place to start. Hey, look and see if there's an appointment on the book. See how busy that you are. If you need to make an appointment, go down to the time that's in question, click it, block, and then just follow the prompts. Hopefully they're an existing client. Makes it a lot easier. Even if they're not an existing client, that's not a hang-up. That's not a problem. You just have to fill out a few more questions, but just follow along. Bless you. I recommend once you sign into Fusion, if you're not already signed, for instance, for this particular office, I have it shared with our office Google Calendar. This is an option that I have chosen, so whatever gets... Oh, come on, I'm already signed in. Well, I guess it's not going to pop. Well, it's still working on it. Give it a second. This is one of the tabs I have set up to open automatically when we open Chrome. Again, it comes up. We see that there's an appointment. So there's two ways to find out whether there's an appointment. Don't make appointments here. Only look at this screen to see if there is an appointment. Make appointments in Fusion. If you make an appointment here, it won't block out the time in Fusion, and then you might get double booked. And that causes a problem. Only make appointments through the Fusion app. That way it blocks out the time. That way we don't get overbooked. Only use this for review. Use this to make them. And here, a few other last minute things that I want to talk about before we close up for today. Client envelope. I'll come a little closer for you. Make sure you fill out as much information on here as you possibly can. First name, last name. Put both spouses on there if they're filing a joint return. Under Social Security number, only use the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. And I prefer, if they're married filing jointly, put both on there. Make sure you do the tax year. If it's an off tax year, if you're not doing a 2024 tax return, you're doing a 23, highlight this so we know to look where to look, so we know where to look. Further information down here. Again, we'll cover this in more detail on an individual basis. Again, who started the return, who's finished the return, who's double-checked the return, who transmitted the return. All that gets signed out, dated. Whether or not, how they paid, whether it's a financial product. If it was a financial product, right over here for us on how much the bill actually was, just for reference sake. Over here, we want to make sure what states were filed. If you need more states, sometimes you do, add more states. When they come and pick stuff up, make sure that you have this area filled out. Who picked it up, have them sign for it. Double check their identity, ask for a driver's license. Maybe even ask for the last social as you come up with it. Hey, by the way, what's the last four of your social? And they give it to you, and then you make sure that you've got who you need to. Don't hand anything out to anybody claiming that has no right to a tax return. On the back, notes. Use this if you need to. There's also a way to do it digitally. We'll cover that in more detail on an individual basis training. But fill out notes. That helps us. You know, not always is it going to be you dealing with the client. They might come back later. I don't know about you, but I don't like coming in blind. I like to be able to look at the notes. Oh, Shannon started this return, but I'm missing a W-2, she says. Hey, did you bring it? They already know what's going on. I have an idea what's going on. You know, Joe started the return, but, you know, the spouse wasn't here to sign. She's here to sign now. Great. I can see that. Needs spouse signature. I know what I need to do. I know how long it's going to take. Thank you, sir. Can't have too much information on this. Next piece of information that I desperately want to talk about to make sure that all offices are doing this is a requirement by Liberty at corporate level. Check log. If we do a paper check printed out here in the store and they come to pick it up, they have to sign for it. We have a log. It's kept in the back room. On that is this grid. Has the customer's name. What type of identification was used to make sure the customer was the person that should be picking up the check? When that ID expires. What the check number is. The date that's being picked up. The customer's signature, and then the signature of the tax preparer giving out the check. All of this needs to be filled out before the check is presented to the client. One last thing I want to cover when it comes to Deep Blue. Issuing a card, when it asks if you're starting from scratch about a new client, you have this packet right here. On the back is the information that you need at the bottom. This is the digits that it's asking for to start the process of issuing a permanent card to the client. Inside is a temporary card. You do not open this. The client opens this. You do not. All the information you need is on the back cover. Also, when you issue a Deep Blue card, again, this is a log. It's in everybody's office. It's a requirement from corporate. Again, customer's name, last four of the customer's social security number, the last four of the card, which is on this page, customer signature, employee signature, who gave it to them. That way we can keep track of that. Sometimes the customer will lose it. There's a procedure for issuing a replacement card. Has to be done here in the office. Get with me if you have to do it. If it's this particular office, either I or Shannon will do it. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but it does require a phone call. All right, so that's the policy and procedures that I wanted to talk about that are generic. Again, keep in mind that everything I talked about, I tried to keep it as generic as possible to cover the entity, and as far as Liberty is concerned, about the way that they want to do things. Moving forward from this point, each individual office is going to have their own discrepancies about how they want to handle things per se. But what I talked about holds for every office. No client data is stored at the desk. It's all stored in the back room in a file cabinet. These logs must be filled out when issuing checks. These logs must be filled out when issuing net spin cards. Even if you're doing a replacement net spin card, you have to put it in the log. Corporate can come and audit those. If you don't have those, we get kicked out of the program potentially. If we get kicked out of the program, we might as well close up office, because all we could do at that point is accept cash payments. And you know as well as I do that there are not very many cash customers out there. We need to have these. So we have these things in place. This is what Liberty wants. This is what we're going to do. Follow those rules. We should be fine. If you have any questions, get a hold of me. I'll answer them as best I can. Always keep in mind there's customer support available. And I'll go over that one real quick. If you need to ask, if you have a question and you can't get a good answer for it, go to the support tab. And then go over here to Support Central. And come down here to Submit a Ticket. They'll ask you some prompts about what type of question you have. Be as specific as you possibly can. If you can't get specific enough, get close as possible. They'll kick it to where it needs to go. To find the people that answer the question. Be specific as possible with your question. They will get back with you relatively quickly. Support is pretty good about answering questions in a timely manner. They will either contact you via phone, they might call the office, or they might just respond to your ticket. And one of the things on the ticket is going to be your email, so you'll know when you sent it. It'll acknowledge it. You'll get an email, and when they respond to it, you'll get an email with the response. It will also be under My Tickets. You can go back and look at old tickets that you have issued to see answers. So that's another way to go. Never be ashamed to ask questions. That's why I'm here. I want to answer your questions. That's why corporate's there. They want to answer your questions. We don't want to put out bad product. We want to put out solid stuff. Ask your questions. There's no downgrade here for submitting 20 tickets to corporate. They might be a little frustrated, but they'll still answer you, so don't worry about that. So, again, thank you for watching.